They say separation between church and state, they told me. I said, all right, let's forget about that for one time. They say separation between church and state, they told me. I said, all right, let's forget about that for one time.
When religious power controls civil government, freedom of conscience is the first thing to disappear. Because whenever church and state fuse together, freedom dies, and persecution begins. This is not a political issue for me. This is a prophetic issue.
The separation of church and state was created to prevent governments from picking religions and religions from picking governments. But on National Prayer Day, the President of the United States said something no predecessor ever would.
They say separation between church and state, they told me. I said, all right, let's forget about that for one time.
The words separation of church and state aren't actually in the Constitution. They come from an 1802 Thomas Jefferson letter who called for a, quote, eternal separation between church and state. But over time, the courts interpreting the First Amendment have made it the law of the land. Under Trump, however, we have seen that wall systematically eroded in favor of a particular brand of Christian nationalism. Let's start with the head of the White House Faith Office, Pastor Paula White-Cain. When it became clear Trump was losing the 2020 election, she appeared on a live-streamed prayer service and called on literal angels to secure his re-election.
Angels are being released right now. Angels are being dispatched right now. Hamanda aka ata raka deda baka sanda ata ambo.
Then there's Attorney General Pam Bondi chairing the task force to, quote, eradicate anti-Christian bias, unquote, in a country where 87% of Congress identifies as Christian. Or Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who has pushed for the 10 Commandments in public schools while chairing the Religious Liberty Commission. It's even in the military. Last week, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth invited a self-described Christian nationalist pastor to lead a prayer service at the Pentagon. A pastor who has publicly advocated for repealing women's right to vote, and in his 1996 book argued that slavery promoted, quote, affection between the races, unquote, in the South. To be clear, Christian nationalism is not Christianity. Christian nationalism is the belief that America was founded as a fundamentally Christian nation and should be governed as such. A stunning new poll this week found that as many as 1 in 3 Americans are either adherents or sympathizers with Christian nationalism. Among Republicans, that number jumps to more than half. Thomas Jefferson wrote his separation of church and state letter in 1802 because he understood something fundamental. The wall he described wasn't built to keep faith out of America. It was built to keep the government from deciding whose faith counts. Joining us now to discuss is Brad Onishi. He is co-host of the Straight White American Jesus podcast, author of the upcoming book, American Caesar, How Theocrats and Tech Lords Are Turning America into a Monarchy. Brad, you literally wrote the book on this. You were once inside this movement. So when you hear Trump say, let's forget about separation of church and state, what does that sound like to you?
Well, I think the first question we always have to ask when a member of the government, an executive leader like Trump, says that they want to bring back religion, that they want to welcome religion into the government, we have to ask this: whose religion? And in this case, it's whose Christianity? And the relationship between Trump and Christian nationalists goes back a decade by now. But that relationship continues to thrive in his second term for a number of reasons. The recent data that you just mentioned that came out this week from PRRI shows us why Christian nationalists and Trump continue to be a perfect match. Christian nationalists show a deep affinity for authoritarianism. They are an outlier when it comes to their fellow Americans in terms of their affinity for authoritarian governance. Many of them see democracy as the problem, not the solution to America's problems. They're also an outlier when it comes to great replacement theory. When it comes to people of faith in the United States, white Christian nationalists are those who believe in the highest numbers by far that white people are being replaced in this country and elsewhere. They're also the most skeptical of birthright citizenship. So if you put all of that together, these are people of faith who see Trump's policies in terms of immigration, mass deportation, ICE raids in the Twin Cities and Chicago and LA, not as going against the teachings of Jesus, not as heresy, but as bringing in revival, purifying the nation of God's enemies and restoring its greatness. And so when I hear him talk about tearing down that wall, well, that's, I think, what he's welcoming, a certain form of Christianity that matches with his approach to governance in terms of authoritarianism, immigration, and other pillars of his administration.
Can I just ask one follow-up on that? What does that imply that Donald Trump and others who seem to believe in the Christian Nationalist Project think should happen to people like me? I'm Jewish. Or people like my co-host, Ayman, who's Muslim. What does that mean happens to people who do not believe in the same faith?
Well, let's take Doug Wilson, who was mentioned earlier. Doug Wilson was welcomed to the Pentagon this week by Pete Hegseth at the monthly prayer service that Hegseth hosts. Wilson is a pastor who's a self-identified Christian nationalist. Now, what he has said in the past is this: in the America that he wants, the America he envisions, if you are a non-Christian, if you are a Muslim, if you're a Hindu, if you're a Buddhist, you can practice your faith in your heart and in your home. But there will be no mosques, no gurdwaras, no temples. You will not be allowed to practice your religion in public. The public space will belong to Jesus, King Jesus. He also believes that you should not be able to hold office. So when it comes to Muslim Americans, when it comes to those who are not Christian, those who profess no religion, atheists, humanists, agnostics, they will be second-class citizens at best. And if they get out of line, if they're not willing to participate in the regime's policies, there will be further consequences in his vision.
So, Brad, you've said that January 6th was the logical outcome of decades of this movement preparing for what some see as a war. What are they preparing for now? They've gotten the leader that they've wanted. They've gotten a leader who's willing to enable them. And you've talked about what that might look like, according to this pastor at the Pentagon. But how does this get implemented? Where are we watching this play out? Because, we were talking about this on the show last night, especially in the state of Texas, the rise of Islamophobia being weaponized and trying to limit all kinds of, the ability of Muslims to build a subdivision or to have a mosque and have a school. And the concern is that it spreads from there elsewhere in America. But how do you see this playing out, this vision being implemented? What are we looking out for here?
Yeah, so I think the schools are one place. I think we could have a long discussion about the Ten Commandments bills across the country, in Texas and Louisiana and other places. I think we could talk about the ways that local governments often stand between people of faith, those who are Muslim or Hindu, Buddhist, and so on, from building places of gathering and so on. But let me just focus in on something that I think is at the top of mind for everyone in the country right now. We're seeing this play out when it comes to ICE raids and ICE's operations across the country. I know that for most folks watching tonight, seeing what's happened in the Twin Cities over the last 2 months is horrifying. But if, like me, you spend time every day monitoring what Christian nationalist leaders and pastors and clergy and theologians are saying, they see there the front lines of the war to take America back for God. That when they see 5-year-old Liam or Chong Lai Tao pulled out of his home wearing nothing but a blanket, when they see those images, they're not horrified. What they see are the seeds of revival. And so, in terms of action, in terms of the forefront of where they want to see Trump moving this country back towards God, some pastors I follow who are prominent in this community say that will happen when 100 million people are deported. So, we can go to all over the country in terms of education, in terms of public building, but immigration to me is the place where we are seeing the most movement in terms of a Christian nationalist project.
Brad Onishi, thank you.
Thanks, Brad.
Friends, as a Seventh-day Adventist, I cannot stay silent. Let us pray for revival. Yes, but revival of the heart, not control of the government. Stay awake. Stay faithful. Jesus is coming soon.